welcome to South Shore first Grand Slam, Story Slam. I realize some of you are still getting seats. We expected about 70. Woohoo for the South Shore. We have gone and sold ourselves out, I believe. I would like to have, Ben's over there, okay, great. I would like to ask, I know, this is really, let me ask in this room, who has never been to a Story Slam? Wow, well, welcome. And you picked the best one to come to, because this is a room of the best of the South Shore, the winners that we had. My name is Andrea Lovett. I produced over 20 Story Slams this season. Not all are represented tonight, but many of them are. We have 12 tellers. We have audience choice. If you need a form, you should let us know. They should be up there. And let me tell you how this works. Because this is a competition, they won on 5 minutes with a minute grace period. Tonight, they will win on 4 minutes and 30-second grace period. It is not a marathon. It's about choosing the best words to put your story forth. And it's a craft. Storytelling is a craft. So you want to use your words wisely. And the best thing I told my tellers is to absolutely be in the moment. Go with that memory that you're telling and connect. I have a few people I need to thank, and that would be my judges, who are sitting right here. They are volunteers and they know their way around a good story. I have Arnie Danielson in the middle. He is a poet. He's the president of Brockton Arts. And I have heard he is a master of words. I have in this corner, Charlot Lucien. He's also an international storyteller. He's a painter, a poet, and is best known for his work in the Haitian community in Boston, Brockton, and of course, Haiti. Right there, center left, I guess, is Jay O'Callahan. Jay O'Callahan is an international storyteller and has been commissioned by, of all places, NASA. Yes, that's right, the NASA. And when it was winding down recently, or downsizing, they asked Jay to come up with a story, which was amazing. I don't know if you bought CDs tonight or not. Did you? No? Also, when Bethlehem Steel was closing, they called on Jay to come up with another story. So Jay is well versed in storytelling. He knows his way around storytelling. And over here to my left, let's give a hand for this wonderful, wonderful quintet. This is... They played us in, and we'll hear little bits during the evening, probably with maybe some wonderful guitar. I would like to introduce, this is Barbara Labasco right here on the flute. I'll do her in a minute. Sally Davenport, who is walking over, and she is responsible for the oboe. Mike Weber does clarinet and classical guitar, I think. And Christina is Shortall, oh, there you are, right in front of me. Bassoon, and Jim Whipple, the horn. So, I have 12 tellers tonight. How the evening is going to work is I have a special guest who I have known for quite a while now, and I've watched him grow as a storyteller. He won Mass Mouth 2011, the Big Mouth Off. That was my name. Do you like it? I can't use it anymore, but do you like it? The Big Mouth Off. This is the Grand Slam, Story Slam. I moved away from Mass Mouth, and now Mass Mouth's doing very well. They're doing WGBH, and all sorts of things on Wednesdays. I'm proud of them. So he has also gone to the Philly Story Stand in Philadelphia Books and Science Festival. He's been a guest storyteller at the Coolidge Theater, and I would like to welcome Ben Cunningham to the stage.
Back in the 80s, I stayed with my aunt and uncle in Columbia, South Carolina, and they had one of those old color television sets. You know, the kind that's about the size of a piece of furniture. It's got that nice hardwood finish along the sides, kind of like a station wagon from the Brady Bunch. Gave off low levels of radiation that most parents were concerned about. Well, my aunt and uncle, they left me in the home alone with nothing to do but watch television. Problem was, television in the 80s, in Columbia, South Carolina, you didn't have many programs to choose from. You had televangelist, pro wrestling, and B-movies. So I watched a lot of B-movies. And one thing I learned from those B-movies is that every mutant, every monster, every giant had one thing in common: radiation. Radiation from the atomic bomb turned them into giants. So I ran my hand across that television, and I felt that static electricity, that radioactive glow, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could just run my entire body across that screen? I could become a mutant. I could become a giant. I could become the Colossal Man. But it was too late. The television was too small, and I was too big. And that's when I looked at my aunt's goldfish tank, and I looked at the television set, and a light bulb went off in my head. Bling! Science experiment. I was going to take goldfish, run them across the screen through the field of static electricity and radiation, manipulating their DNA, creating giant mutant goldfish. And by the end of the day, Columbia, South Carolina was going to have one hell of a fish fry. And I would solve world hunger. So I took the first specimen out of the tank and I brought it to the screen, and there was a televangelist, and he was beating on his Bible, shouting, brothers and sisters, the end is coming near. So I brought the goldfish closer to the screen, and when my hand kissed that glass, it was like science and religion meeting for the very first time. And I took that fish and I went, and I dropped the fish back in the tank, and the fish went, belly up. So I took the second specimen out of the tank and I changed the channel, and there was Hulk Hogan, and he had some wrestler's life in his hands, kind of like how I have this kind of goldfish's life in my hands. And I went in the opposite direction to reverse the current. And I dropped that fish back in the tank, and the fish went belly up. So I couldn't figure out what was going wrong with my experiment. All my specimens were dying, so I shut that television off and I let it juice back up. And I waited. And I turned that television set back on, and I grabbed that fish and changed the channel. There was Godzilla and Mothra on Monster Island, and Godzilla was going, and Mothra was going, and everybody was running like it was Armageddon, and they're going, and I took that fish, and I went, and I chopped that fish back to the tank, and the fish went. And by the end of the day, all the fish were floating at the top of the tank. And the televangelist was beating on his Bible, shouting, but the volume was down. And it was like some surreal message from the book of Revelations about the apocalypse that was soon to come. And it did. My aunt and uncle came through the door. And my aunt was like, Theodore, I bought these goldfish the other day, and they're all dead. Lord have mercy. My aunt and uncle, they looked at those goldfish, and then they looked at me like I was some kind of a devil child. I ended up getting sent to bed without dinner when I had really tried to solve world hunger.
Thank you. I've been married to a wonderful woman for 32 years. She's a nurse, very sympathetic, very kind, except for this one week about 20 years ago. It started out, I had a couple moles cut off my back, and the stitches were irritating, and I couldn't get a lot of sleep. And at the same time, she had a bad case of poison ivy, and her doctor prescribed steroids. I was to find out that week that there's sometimes in some people steroids create psychosis. So I lived with a psychotic for a week. It was a long week. In any case, I was painting the house, and my wife always cautioned me to be careful on ladders, which I ignored her advice. So I went to step from the ladder onto this brick porch, and I fell. And when I fell, I smashed my elbow and I broke my arm. So after screaming, she came out, gave me a really dirty look, and shipped the kids off to the neighbors and took me to the emergency room. So that night, I had trouble sleeping because now I got the stitches on my back, which were already irritating me, and now my arm's in a sling. And I wake up the next day and I'm exhausted because I haven't really slept now for 3 straight nights. But the kids were getting ready for school. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, it's noisy. I'll tell you what, I'll go upstairs and I'll go to bed up in the bedroom. But my wife cautions me again and she says, the medicine you're on is a diuretic. You're going to be dehydrated, so be careful. Once again, I ignored her advice, and I walk upstairs. That's the last thing I remember, because apparently when I got up to the bathroom, I passed out, fell, and smashed my head on the tub. This is a true story. Next thing I remember, there's 2 firemen there, and they're taking care of me. And off again, the kids go to the neighbors, and we go to the emergency room again. And they fix me up, and it doesn't really get funny till later, but that's not supposed to be the funny part. So they fix me up. And now, the next day I wake up, and I'm even more exhausted than I was before, but my wife decides to give us a break, so she suggests we go out to eat. And I said, oh my God, I need to take a nap. So I pass out in the recliner. Well, shortly after I passed out, people start yelling. And normally you'd wake up when people are yelling, but I was so tired, instead of waking up, I incorporated their screams into my dreams. So what was really happening was my daughter, my 4-year-old, had locked herself out. She was yelling for someone to let her in. And my wife's down in the basement yelling for someone to open the door. My 7-year-old son's playing Legos, ignoring us like he always did. So, but in my dream, for some reason, I imagined that my wife and my daughter something tragic had happened to my daughter, and she's at the front door screaming to get in because she has to call 911. And I'm thinking to myself, I got to save my baby. So I sit bolt right up in the recliner and I start running for the front door, except I'm still sleeping. And I'm running full speed, and some idiot, I think it was me, had left the pantry door ajar 6 inches. And I ran full speed into the door. Broke the fall with my face, fortunately. So I bounced off, literally went airborne, and I bounced off, and I landed on my rear end, and I'm sitting on the floor. Now I got 2 bumps on my head, and I still got the stitches on my back, and I got my arm in a cast. And I'm sitting there, and I finally woke up, and I noticed my glasses have been peeled in my face. And I can't get rid of them because it's like a fishhook. So my wife walks up the stairs and she opens the back door for my daughter and lets her in, and she turns and she sees me, and I got a fat lip too. So I turn to her and I go, honey, we've got to go to the hospital again. I can't get the black out of my face. So she takes me to the hospital, and as we walk into the emergency room, I'm just thinking, I must look like Dustin Hoffman at the end of Midnight Cowboy right before he dies in the bus. So I'm walking in like this. And the nurse must have had a tough day because she was in a surly mood. And so she looks at me and she says in a really sarcastic tone, like, what's the problem? Well, now my wife's mad at me and the nurse because only my wife can insult me, right? And so she's pissed at the nurse. This is true story. She leans forward on the table and she gets about a foot away from him and she says, the problem is, I married an idiot. And then she stands up like that was a normal thing to say. So the nurse looks at me, and I'm standing there like this, and all I could do was nod my head. In any case, they got the glasses out of my face, and even my wife realized something was wrong. So she got off the steroids, and she reverted back to her wonderful nature that she had. Unfortunately, my behavior was not chemically induced, and so there are still too many times over the last 20 years where my behavior can only be characterized as idiotic. Thank you very much.
I share this story in memory of my grandmother who died 8 years ago today. I forbid you to tell your grandmother you're a lesbian. It would kill her, said my mother shortly after I came out to her. If you couldn't tell, my family's from New York, and my mother was actually born in Germany in a displaced persons camp right after World War II. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, so my grandmother survived Auschwitz and Ravensbrück and a death march. but according to my mother, she wouldn't survive me telling her I was a lesbian. So I respected her wishes, and I didn't tell her, but when I came out, I vowed never to lie. And over the years, my grandmother would occasionally ask, about my personal life, and she'd say, "So, do you have a boy chick?" Boy chick is Yiddish for boyfriend. And I mostly dated butch women on the masculine end of the gender spectrum, so it wasn't such a stretch to say, "Yeah, I have a boy chick." So, went on like that, and basically, as my mother became more comfortable with it, she gave me the green light to come out to my grandmother at some point. But I really agonized over this decision because my grandmother was the closest relative to me. We had a really special relationship. I cherished our weekly conversations, that we had a weekly phone date. And I didn't want to do anything to mess up our relationship. And I also just didn't even know if she would understand what it meant to be queer. And so I decided to kind of test the waters and just start dropping some clues, talk about gay friends, see how it hit her. And in one of our weekly conversations, I shared having just seen the baby of some friends of mine, a lesbian couple. And a whole debate ensued about gay parenting. And she was arguing that a child couldn't grow up healthy without a father. I was citing psychological studies, saying the opposite. We were going back and forth, and suddenly she interrupts me, and she says, "I have a question. It's a personal question." And I got nervous. And she said, "Is this something you can imagine for yourself?" And I lost my breath. And I had not been expecting to go there in the very first conversation that I was dropping clues, but my grandmother, my 91-year-old grandmother, with all of her chutzpah, beat me to it. And she asked me. And I hesitated and was trying to answer her, and she could tell that I was having trouble, and she said, "It's okay, you don't have to answer." And I said, "Baba, I want to answer you, but I'm afraid my answer will hurt you." And she said, "Secrets hurt me more than anything you could ever tell me." So I told her. And a flood of questions ensued. And she asked me, how did I know that I liked women? And so I put the question back to her rhetorically, "Well, how did you know you liked men?" Not expecting to get an answer, and then I got an earful of her entire sexual history. And we went back and forth, and so it went, and we eventually got off the phone, and I was very relieved, and I was also terrified, because I didn't know how this was all going to sit with her. And if it was going to affect our relationship, and I decided I would call her in a couple of days to check in. And the very next day, as I was leaving work, my phone rang, and I picked it up. "Mein Kliga Cup, I'm just calling to see how you're doing." Once again, my grandmother beat me to it. Thank you.
This is a story about my lousy brother. Larry was evil, evil, evil. I was born kind of robust. There was nothing wrong with my nose, and there was nothing wrong with my chest. So I had to eat all my broccoli. I had to eat all my spinach. Larry didn't. When Larry was born, he had a couple of minor problems. He was born 6 years younger than me. He had a nose that would spontaneously bleed. You know St. Francis of Assisi with the stigmata? Blood from his hands and blood from his side, blood from his feet, Christ wounds. Larry had the stigmata of the schnozola. When he would bleed, my mother would go berserk. She'd pull down the curtain, she'd pull over the tablecloth. She'd rip the shirt off my back and stuff it against his nose to stop the bleeding. Well, Larry had another problem. He had a hole in his chest. It wasn't really a hole. His ribs dented in a little in the middle, so he had a bit of a trench. But Mom called it the hole in Larry's chest. Doctor said no problem. She was sure he was going to die any second, either from his nose or his heart was going to smash against the other side of the hole. He stopped. So he was spoiled rotten. This guy was such a creep. He wanted my toys, of course. I was 6 years old. He'd just point, and Mama would say, give it to him, give it to him. He took my Lionel trains and played bombardier out the second floor window, crashing against my bike. And ice cream. We never had ice cream before Larry. Now the freezer was stuffed. Okay? Larry would push his broccoli and spinach away. Mama would run for strawberry ice cream, my favorite. Pile it on. Mom, could I have some? I'd ask. It's my favorite. No, it's for Larry. This was medicinal ice cream. Well, Larry didn't even eat it. He just mushed it around and smiled at me evilly, okay? And then when Mama left the room, he'd pick it up, go to the sink, pour it in, and run the hot water just looking at me. I hated him. I hated him. I'd go for his throat, of course, right? And he'd yell out, no! And Mom, the water buffalo, would come in and beat me and ban me. And he's been battered like that in the back of me. It was horrible. Years go by, I'm 16, he's 10. I turned into a bit of a scholar, we share a room. And I'm studying at 3 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by books, surrounded by my magic markers. And I look over at him, and he sleeps like a rock. And nothing wakes him up. And he looks like an angel. But I hate him, he's lousy, he's my brother. And the devil starts whispering in my ear, and I go up to him. And with my red magic marker, red coming out of his nose, around his mouth, down his chin, onto the pillow. And a bullet hole right there with shattercracks, a Frankenstein scar with football stitches. And for extra measure, I slit his throat. Then I open up his pajamas and do a number on his chest. I'm exhausted, I go to bed. Next thing I know, screams, it's light out. And Mom is over Larry with the pillow, smashing it against his nose, trying to stop the blood. But it's all dry. He's dead. Her little Tootsie Roll is now dead. She falls down on her knees and she looks up at the sky and starts crying out to St. Jude. The patron saint of hopeless cases, by the way. And St. Jude answers, well, like Lazarus, Larry's little eyes start opening, and this little bastard comes back from the dead. And Mama sees the hole now, and she sees the scar, she sees the neck, and she knows who did it, and she gives me a dirty look, but she has to recover quickly. She has to show she's the mama, and she knew all along. So she drags Larry to the mirror and says, look at you, get in the shower, go take a bath, wash it off. And she yanks off his pajama tops. And there is my masterpiece, the black crater in the middle of his chest, with aliens crawling out. And they're green with red eyes and purple antennae. And around it there's all the smoldering mess of nuclear spent fuel and the wreckage from his UFO. And Mama lets out the biggest scream in the world. And she grabs a tennis racket and she beats me and she beats me and she beats me. I never enjoyed a beating from my mama so much in my whole life.
Thanksgiving is the mother lode for dining disaster. All of the ingredients are there. Food, family, tradition, high expectation, and a tight timeline. And I think of this every year when Thanksgiving comes around to a Thanksgiving I shared with my sister in New Haven. It was the early 80s. And I got there the night before, Wednesday night, just as she was putting the turkey in the oven. You may remember this fad that was very brief in the early 80s. For a moist, succulent turkey, you put the turkey in the night before in a brown paper grocery bag, tightened up, in a very low oven, about 200. Then you wait the next morning to the moistest, most succulent turkey ever. We woke the next morning to acrid smoke. The apartment was full of acrid, burnt grocery bag, fouler than you can imagine, and a beyond recognition burnt turkey. It didn't look like a turkey. So right then, we joined the next great American tradition, the Thanksgiving turkey crisis. My brother-in-law was sent out to find a new turkey, and I was sent to open up the windows. My brother-in-law comes back with the next best thing, 2 little chickens from the corner store. In the oven they go, no time for low temperature because we know how that turned out. And guests were arriving. So my sister and my brother-in-law are academics in an international field. And their specialty is inviting people to their Thanksgiving for whom this is their very first American treat. It's like a UN round table. You don't know who you're going to be sitting next to, but you're sure that they've never, ever had cranberry sauce before. So the meal started and it's going great. Everyone's loving the dishes. She's over-explaining everything. This is that. There's the marshmallow debate and all the side dishes. It's fantastic, except one problem. We're running out of food. The little chickens are just not making it. Somehow word got out that in the kitchen, hidden under layers of foil, was a turkey-like object. And I think it was my brother-in-law, because he brought it in. Oh no, my sister starts protesting. This is not an American turkey. This is not how it looks. This is not how it goes. And she's interrupted. Stop. You don't understand. A man at the table says, you don't understand. This is the most meat that we have seen in one place since we were children. You have turkey, you have chicken, and you have the rest of this? This is fantastic. And then we just kept on eating and poured more gravy on everything. There was a group that day, and he was from this group. I think there were 4, maybe 6, from Poland. And they were emigrating to Israel by way of New Haven, Connecticut, for a reason I don't understand to this day. But there they were. And they had certainly stories of repression, religious repression, economic strife, scarcity. But we didn't hear that story that day, and we weren't listening for that story. We were just pouring gravy on a very burnt turkey to make it moist. And when dessert rolled around, and my sister was explaining and over-explaining the differences between the apple and the pumpkin and whipped cream or ice cream, I was passing a piece of pie to my next-door neighbor, a gentleman who hadn't really said much for the entire meal. And as I passed him the piece of pumpkin pie, he said to me very quietly, he leaned over and he said, "You live in the land of plenty." And then he said to the entire table in a stronger voice, "You live in the land of plenty." And indeed we do. Thank you.
My angel with the mic. My mother once glued herself to the wall. She didn't mean to, but she did. My father loved gadgets, all sorts of gadgets, and he had come home that day with something called super glue. Now, super glue in the commercials could glue a whole helmet to a rivet, or a rafter, I think it was. And the man would hold on and kick his legs. So we had a telephone in our house. It had a cord about this big. If you wanted privacy, you had to go in the other room, and then we would pick at the wallpaper because it was there, and it was just something to do. And my father had come home and thrown the super glue, the new gadget, on the hutch. My mother must have opened the super glue and tried to reattach the wallpaper. And when I came home, the phone was over her shoulder, and she said, "Thank God you're home." She was glued to the side of the wall. And after some prying of her hands from the wall, and she had these big shards hanging from her hands, she said to me, which was a saying in our household that we always said, "Now don't tell your father." And we didn't.
So I was at my cabin in northern Maine in the summertime, and my cabin is so remote. In the 15 years that I have lived there or owned it, I have seen another human being just twice. And the story I'm about to tell you is of the second time. So I have heard fear described as an adaptive trait, that you become frightened, you get a shot of adrenaline that causes you to have heightened senses, you strategize, and then you can create a response to your fear. I was at my cabin and I looked out the window, and there's a hillside, even though I'm in the deep woods, but this was all blueberry bushes, and I saw a man walking up the hill, and I was by myself. And I thought, okay, the best defense is a good offense. So I opened the door to the cabin and I let my dogs out. 100 pounds of dog flesh went charging down the hill, barking, barking. Branches are snapping. It was bedlam. And they stopped within about 8 feet of the man, and they're barking, barking. I stood on the porch and I called out, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" I was so terrified. Well, he was terrified. The color had washed from his face, his eyes were huge, and he's saying, "My name is Kevin, and I'm visiting my cousin down the end of the lake, and I'm helping him put cabinets in his kitchen. I know a little bit of carpentry." So I let him talk until he was out of breath, and then I said, "Come on up, I'll make you a cup of tea," because he was pretty upset. Months later, in the dead of winter, I was at the cabin again by myself, but this time I know I was alone. Because in order to get there in the winter, I had to go 8 miles through the woods on my snowmobile, and I was breaking new trail. When I got to the lake, the frozen lake, I looked out, and as far as the eye could see, it was fresh, virgin snow. One night while I was up there in the winter, I woke up during the night and I had to go pee. That meant I had to put on my boots, put on my coat, go outside, go around the back into the woods to the outhouse. But I was frightened. So I stood in the cabin and I was debating it. And I knew that I wanted to go to the bathroom because I'd come back, put another log on the fire. But I was frightened. So I opened the door to the cabin, and I looked out, and as I slept, it had snowed a little bit more, and it covered my tracks, it covered the dog poop. It was beautiful, and it was peaceful. So I went to the outhouse, and then instead of going back and going to bed, I put on more clothes, and I put on my snowshoes. And I hiked through the woods out onto the frozen lake to look at the stars. And in the winter in Maine, the sky can be so clear, you could take a pencil and draw a line around the Milky Way. And with the naked eye, I could count 7 stars in the Pleiades. So sometimes fear keeps you safe, but sometimes it's a thief, and all it wants to do is keep you from looking at the stars.
All of my ancestors came from Ireland, and my grandmother, Mary Goggin, born and raised in Ireland, came to the United States in the early 20s on holiday with her sister. And while she was here, met a dapper young fellow who was my grandfather. And they were quite taken with each other. But when it came time for Mary Goggin to go back to Ireland when her holiday was over, he tried very hard to convince her to stay. But she said, "No, I'm only on holiday, I have to go back home." So back to Ireland she went with her sister. Well, he wasn't going to let her go that easily. So he followed her to Ireland and tried to convince her there to come back to the States with him. And she, wise woman that she was, said, "I cannot go back to the States with you unless you marry me." So he married her in Cork in August 1923, and I have their marriage certificate. So the two newlyweds got on a boat, came back to the United States, and June 8th, 1924, my father was born. They named him Paul Goggin Kelleher. And 3 days later, Mary Goggin died, leaving my grandfather with a 5-pound infant and devastated. So he asked his sister, who had children of her own, to please take the baby and raise her with her own children, which she did. So my father grew up with his cousins and never heard a word about his mother, because if you're Irish and things like this happen, you don't talk about them. So he only knew his mother's name because his middle name was her maiden name, and never heard a word about her his whole life. He grew up, he got married my mother, had 10 children of his own, I'm number 8. And at age 48, my mother died, leaving him with 10 children. He remarried, we all grew up, and went on our merry way. And when he was alone with my stepmother, decided to start going back to Ireland to try to find his mother's family. Now, her family, in the meantime, had gotten a telegram from my grandfather simply stating, Mary had a son and died, and never heard another word. So my father starts taking these trips to Ireland with my stepmother, trying to find his mother's family. And the great thing about Ireland is, when you tell them your last name, they know where to send you. So they kept sending him south, and you know, this was trip after trip, and he finally ended up in a town called Skull, which is where Mary Goggin was from. And he said, what do I do now? And my stepmother said, go to the post office. So he walked into the post office and he started telling the postman the story of Mary Goggin and trying to find her family. And an old woman comes out from the back room and says, sit down, tell me the story. I know everyone. And all their business, I'm sure. So he told her the story of Mary Goggin, and she said to him, Mary has a brother, Edward, who moved to Bandon. Go to Bandon and you'll find him. So they went to Bandon, and again went into the post office and said to the postman, I'm trying to find Edward Goggin. And the postman said, he owns the insurance company 2 doors down. So my father walks 2 doors down, walks into an insurance company, is facing, which he doesn't know, his first cousin, and says, I'm Paul Goggin Kelleher from America. And his cousin says, don't move. My father is up the street having lunch with my brother. And out he runs, up the hill. A few minutes later, down the hill come 3 guys, his 2 cousins, and his uncle. This old man opens the door to the insurance company and says, my nephew from America, I never knew what happened to you. And that is how my father found his mother's family, and it happened to be his birthday. So that was the day that Edward Goggin got to meet the baby that his sister had had 60 years before. Thank you.
So we are about to begin our next set. In the back, I have heard that you have not been hearing us. Can you hear me now? No, look, they can't. Raise your hand if you can hear me. You can't see me. Well, that's not my problem. I was born this way. Turn down the searchlights. Where are they? I don't like searchlights. If you would like to know more about storytelling during the summer, I usually don't hold many story events in the summer. On June 11th, the winners will be invited to the first Indie Music Festival here at the Fuller Craft Museum, and they will be features. And that is June 11th. You can come here and listen to them. On May 8th, tomorrow, there is the Boston Comedy Chicks, Ha Ha Mama, if you're interested. That's my partner who does Doyle's. Are you ready, tellers? You look revved up.
I know it's a little hard to hear at the back. I'll try to speak up. My name is Suzanne Jevney, and for 24 years I was a 4th grade teacher. And then I retired and became a veterinary technician. And I loved that job. It was easier than teaching, and it was very varied. I did everything from cleaning cages, which I didn't mind at all, to assisting in surgery and sterilizing the instruments. But the thing I did the most was hold the animals while the doctor examined them. And that tended to be a bit boring. So I found ways to make it more interesting. I would soothe the animals, maybe a little massage if it wasn't interfering, or I would just feel around to see if maybe I could find some abnormalities that maybe my boss might miss. And so in this particular animal that I was not examining, he was examining, but that I was helping with, The doctor seemed concerned about the heart. He had the stethoscope on the animal for quite a while as I'm just gently moving my hands around the dog. And all of a sudden, I did feel an abnormality. I was so proud of myself, and I thought, oh dear, but how do I let him know without him knowing that I found it? I don't want to embarrass him. So as I'm feeling this thing, it was hairless, and it was firm, and I thought, maybe there's material in it, so I gave it a good squeeze. The dog didn't even react to this fairly firm squeeze, and no material came out. So I was really puzzled. But, all of a sudden I realized, was that a fingernail that it had on it? Oh my dear God, I had been probing the doctor's baby finger. The flush, the perspiration. That was why he was not moving the stethoscope that much, because I had captured his baby finger. I didn't know how to react. Sometimes help isn't all that helpful.
So a number of years ago, I was working on a project that I did not want to be working on. So I logged in to an old Match.com account I had created way back when you could use it to find email pen pals or activity partners. And when I logged in this time, I found that that was no longer the case. This was only a dating site. And I didn't want to date anybody I met online, but I also didn't want to work on this project. So I browsed a couple of profiles and one caught my interest. I went ahead and sent him an email, making it very clear that dating was off the table. We exchanged some email and we started talking, and he was funny, he was interesting, and because dating was off the table, we were pretty candid with each other. And at some point we started to talk about, well, what is your type? What's my type, etc. And he had told me that at some point he had dated a woman who was 5'1" and 90 pounds. And before that, he had dated a woman who was a 6-foot German model. If you were to put that on a graph, like, I'm nowhere on that chart. He asked me what my type was, and, well, it's a hairless physicist. We kept talking, and we enjoyed each other's company, and we decided to meet for a movie. So we're going to meet at Kendall Square, and I show up with a completely chapped face because I'd had a cold the day before, and it wasn't a date, so it didn't matter. And we began watching this movie. We had chosen Talk to Her, and if you've ever seen it, it's a terrible movie to watch with somebody you don't know very well. There is this scene where one of the characters goes and watches a movie, a black and white film, and in this film, there's this incredibly shrinking man who loves his wife, and he loves loving his wife, if you know what I mean, and it becomes more and more difficult as he becomes smaller and smaller. So the climax of this movie, pun intended, there is this backdrop of an enormous vagina. And this man's standing in front of it, and he puts one arm in, he puts another arm in, and he walks in, never to be seen or heard from again. And Christian and I are fixated on the movie, not making eye contact whatsoever. But because it wasn't a date, it was fine. And afterwards, we decided that we wanted to continue talking. It was enjoyable. So I decided I was going to drive, and Christian was going to choose where to go next. You know, a restaurant, a cafe, it was up to him, and he was going to give me directions. What I didn't know, well, we kept talking, and with no input, I went into autopilot, and the next thing I knew, I was parked in front of my house. I noticed that my 2 male roommates were home, so that should be safe, and I invited Christian in, and we stayed up till 7 in the morning talking. And we probably would have talked for longer, except for he remembered that he had a class to go to in a couple of hours. So I gave him a notebook and a pen, and I drove a very sleepy Christian to the subway. I didn't see him for 2 weeks. And when I did see him again, somehow magically, he had become the most handsome thing I had ever seen. And when we realized something could possibly go on between us, he asked me, "Are you sure you can like me?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, because I'm not a physicist. I'm not even good at math." But that's okay. And he lifts his shirt and he says, "And I'm not hairless," which is true. And 13 years later, Christian is still not hairless. And somehow, he's still the most handsome man I've ever seen.
Give you a break. If you love stories and you want, did I tell you more this summer? mass-story.com. Go there, you'll find everything you want to find out for the summer and for the winter, what's coming up. And if you like stories and you want to learn how to tell stories, I do that. I am the one that tells how to tell a 5-minute kick butt story workshop. I have one coming up on June 20th at Doyle's. Just a shameless plug. My next storyteller is Jody Schuon.
I was 29 years old when I came out to my family. My mother cried and yelled. It wasn't the life she wanted for me. My father told me he could heal me when I was ready. My sister told me it was about time. And my grandma Gigi, "I knew it," she said. "How did you know?" I asked. "Well, you were a tomboy. You cried when your mother made you wear dresses. You played with cars and trucks and refused to play with Barbies. And you taught English in South Korea for a year." So, only men do that. So, 8 months later, I met the woman of my dreams. Life got better and better. I proposed, and eventually we were engaged. My grandma Gigi told me that because of me, she was going to therapy. Now, I was flabbergasted. My grandmother, a Holocaust survivor, disowned by her wealthy parents for marrying a poor tailor, emigrated to the United States with no support system and no English. Her beloved husband died at too early an age, and she went to therapy for the first time because of me. So 2 months later, she called me because she had questions. "You love a woman," she told me. "What does this love feel like?" Well, when I see her, my heart sings. She enters the room and I think of nobody else. Everything just feels right. I've never been happier. She interrupted. "I remember feeling that way with your grandpa Charlie," she said, and she talked. Then she asked, "What is it about this Kate that you love so much?" Well, she makes me laugh. She's kind, she's generous, she's loyal. We talk about everything. Gigi interrupted. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said, and she talked. Then she said, "I get it. This love is real. But it's between two women, not a woman and a man. So tell me, how do you two, do it?" Oh, Gigi. So, she's had many questions over the last 10 years, but one has been asked over and over and over. She says, "In your relationship, who's the man?" "There is no man in our relationship, Gigi." "Well, I know you're two women, but are you the man or is Kate the man?" "Gigi, okay, who takes out the trash?" "We both do." "Who cooks dinner?" "We both do." "Who does the grocery shopping?" "We both do." "Who does the laundry?" "Kate does." "Aha! She's the woman and you're the man." "No." "Who fixes the technology?" "Kate does." "So she's the man and you're the woman." "No." "Who fixes things around the house?" "I do." "So you're the man." "No." She has not been satisfied with my answers. So as a married couple, we visited Florida and went out to dinner with my grandma Gigi and her best friend Helene. Kate mentioned that she always wanted to move back to Florida. To which Helene replied, "We need to move to Sarasota and live near them right away." "Don't be stupid," my grandma smacked her friend in the shoulder. "They can't move here until our state government recognizes their family. This is why I tell you we have to vote." I never felt so supported by my grandmother in my entire life. So time passed, life went on. After 3 years of trying, we were pregnant with twins. I called my grandmother and told her that she was going to be a great-grandmother. "Tell me everything," she said. I said, "Okay." We used a sperm donor and my eggs, and we implanted them into Kate using IVF, and we're pregnant. And she said, "Who's carrying the children?" "Kate is," I said. "I knew it," she shrieked. "You knew what?" I said. She shouted, "You're the man!" Thank you.
I knew you heard that in the back when I heard the clapping. So is the sound better back there? A little bit better? While the judges are judging, I'm going to give you a treat. We're going to listen to some more music.
In 2012, I was in London, United Kingdom, studying at Queen Mary University of London. I was hanging around the English and Drama department, and the same year, this university launched Arts 2, which is a new theater, and they asked some of the students in the English and Drama department to put on a 10-minute performance as an induction ceremony. It was a ribbon cutting, and we'd have a very special guest, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, the daughter of the Queen of England. Now, you guys, I don't know if you know, but when you're a princess, there's a lot of rules that you need to abide by when you're visiting any location. For instance, and this one makes a lot of sense, the bathroom must be clean 30 minutes prior to her arrival, and it's a private bathroom. So it was my job to check up on this already cleaned bathroom. So I started with the sink. So, and one thing I learned actually is that a clean sink does not mean just a white porcelain sink. A clean sink means a dry sink. A clean floor means a perfectly dry but shiny floor. And a clean toilet means an overly bleached toilet. So I pour the bleach in, and I'm staring at the toilet and watching it bubble over as if it's as if it's growing like our universe with like the metric expansion of space. And the butterflies start creeping up into my stomach, into my heart. My hands are shaking, and I'm thinking about the inevitable bow. Hand behind the back and bow. So part of the story here is that after the actual performance, the men were and the women were instructed to line up in front of Princess Anne. So the women would curtsy and the men would turn hand around the back and bow. So I wasn't so worried about the other thing that would happen, which is her shaking our hands and then asking some questions. The two questions. The scariest thing for me was the hand behind the back and the bow. Because the thing is that I'm very clumsy and I was worried that I was gonna like fall off the stage, you know? And also I'm an American, so I just imagine that British people inherently know when to bow and when to curtsy. It's like in their DNA, like a Jane Austen novel, do you know what I mean? And so basically the stage manager grabs me out of the bathroom and, we have to get backstage for her arrival. So she comes in and it's like we're in like a lunar landscape. There's no sound, there's no gravity, there's no smell. It's just Princess Anne. And so we do the performance and then we line up as we're, told to do. And of course I'm at the very end of the line. And, so the women are doing curtsy and the men are doing the turn behind the back and bow. And, she's slowly getting to me and I'm listening to her asking the questions, but I'm not hearing any of the sounds. So all I can think of is hand behind the back and bow, hand behind the back and bow, hand behind the back and bow. And finally, she gets to me, hand around the back and curtsy. Leave it to the American to curtsy for Princess Anne. So after my wonderful glamorous performance, I was the first to the wine bar, and so there's champagne. We've had a little bit too much, and at the end of the night, we were all we stayed really late there with some of my friends and colleagues, and so I needed to use the restroom. Princess Anne's once, wonderful little private quarters, and someone had been there before me, and they had gotten way too sick on champagne, and I looked to the toilet, and they had just made a huge mess of it, and I'm thinking to myself, welcome back to the world of the living, Greg. Hand behind the back and bow. Thank you.
In 1968, when I was 17 years old, my parents put me on a train and sent me to Toronto to live in the Salvation Army home for unwed mothers. For 4 months, I lived with 24 other young, sweet, innocent girls with growing bellies. Every day, twice a day, we were sent to chapel, and under the watchful eyes of the Salvation Army sisters, we prayed to Jesus to forgive us for the sin of being unwed and pregnant. When it was time for my baby to come, they put me in a cab. I went to the hospital, they put me in a room, they shaved me, they gave me an enema, and they told me to keep quiet. I was not allowed any drugs or a phone call because I was under 18 years of age. 30 hours later, my baby arrived. In the delivery room, I couldn't look at anyone. I just held my eyes closed because I was so full of shame. And a nurse said to me, "Would you like to hold your baby?" And I said, "No." I knew if I held my baby, I would be haunted for the rest of my life. The next day, a social worker came to get me. I had on a pair of hospital slippers and a Johnny gown, and we went up one floor. The elevator door opened, and a nurse was standing there holding a little baby. The social worker said, "Do you forever relinquish all claim to this child?" I looked at the baby's face, and he had jowls just like his father. This was my baby. Yes, I relinquish all claim to this child forever. The next day, I headed home, a 20-hour train trip back to my small hometown. The next day I went to school. Nobody asked me where I had been for 4 months. But everybody in town knew that I was one of those girls that went away to have a baby. My parents didn't talk to me, my boyfriend didn't talk to me, and I guess in 1968, when nobody talks about it, it didn't happen. But it did happen, and it happened to me, and I was not okay. I failed high school, I failed first 2 attempts at college, I married, I divorced, I gained 40 pounds, I slit my wrists, and I was estranged from my family. Finally, I decided I would find my baby. For 41 years, I looked for him. There were not many ways, there were not many avenues. And then in 2009, the Ontario government changed the law that the birth parent could look at their child's adoption records. I think I was the first person to apply. A letter arrived with the Ontario insignia, and I knew what it was. And I held it and I said, please don't let him be dead. Even if I never see him again, please don't let him be dead. He was alive and he lived 30 miles from where he was born. I wrote him a letter. I think I gave birth to you in 1968. I would love to meet you someday. 5 days later, I got an email. I would love to meet you. I am married, I have a son, and I have so many questions. 10 days later, I met him. I fell in love with him immediately. I love my son, I love my daughter-in-law, I love my grandson. They love and adore my father, my husband. We are a family. Every time I see him, I say to him, what matters most to me? And he always answers that you and I love each other. But I know what matters most to him, and it was that for 41 years I searched for him and I never gave up. Thank you.
So it's 1917, Ukraine. There's a 17-year-old boy, his name is Fishel. His family's dirt poor. Cossacks are killing Jews by the hundreds all around him. He starts to think maybe there's no future for him in rabbinical studies. He starts to think about leaving. He'd most like to go to the United States, but at that point in time, you needed to have family already in the US to sponsor you to get a visa, and he didn't have that. But he'd heard you could get to Cuba without family to sponsor you. So against his father's wishes, he quits rabbinical school with the idea of heading to Cuba. First, he's got to get to the nearest port city, which is hundreds of miles away. So he sets off on foot, staying at people's homes, doing odd jobs, sort of Jewish Airbnb. One night on his journey, he hears a young woman crying down the way, and he asks the people he's staying with, why is she crying? And they say, she's got a stepmother who beats her. So he goes and talks with her. He introduces himself, she introduces herself, her name is Sprinza. They walk in the moonlight, he tells her about his plans to go to Cuba. She says she's got family in a city called Cleveland, and they can sponsor 2 people. And she and her brother Shiki are going to be trying to head there. Well, they walk and they talk and they come up with the plan. And in the morning they present it to her family, which is that Fishel and Sprinza will marry and they'll go to Cleveland, and Shiki will go to Cuba. In other words, they pull a switcheroo. And that's what happened. That's what happened. Fishel and Sprinza, my grandparents, went to Cleveland, and they eventually owned a furniture store and made a nice American middle-class life. And Shiki did go to Cuba, and he got married, and he had kids, and he started a family and started building a life. And then the revolution came. And at first they supported the revolution, but then they came to see it as dictatorial and corrupt. And one of his sons became a doctor, an infectious disease doctor. And one night he was working late in the lab with his mentor, and they're working on developing a vaccine for a deadly virus. And a knock comes on the door, boom, boom, boom. And it's a burly security guard, and he says, don't go home, stay there, you're gonna have a visitor. And a little while later, another knock comes, and Che Guevara comes in. He's going to be heading abroad to foment revolution, and he would like inoculations, please. Well, my cousin thinks about all the harm he sees the revolution is having done, and all the violence that Che is about to perpetrate. And he thinks, I could inject Che with this virus we're working on, and he could die in the jungle in 7 or 8 weeks and nobody would know. He thinks about it. And then he thinks about the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. And he decides he can't do it. And Che, having no idea that he's narrowly avoiding being murdered, gets his inoculations and goes on his way and does not die from that virus in the jungle 7 or 8 weeks later. A few years later, my grandparents, now known as Phil and Fanny, bring Shiki's family from Cuba to the United States. And the last time I see my grandfather, it's 1988. He's pretty old, he's pretty out of it, he's 88 years old. My father and I go and visit him in the nursing home. And in Yiddish, well, he seems to think that my father is Shiki and that I'm one of Shiki's sons. And in Yiddish, he's apologizing, asking for forgiveness for the switcheroo. I'm sorry. And we say, it's okay. Everybody's okay. Nish gefehlt. Everything turned out all right in the end. And that was the last time I saw my grandfather. Thank you.
When I was 16 years old, I lived with my newly divorced mother, who was trying to find herself through the pages of the adult education catalog. She learned to contra dance. She learned to crochet a colorful Afghan. But she found her true calling when she discovered clowning. Over the course of several weeks, she developed her clown persona. She developed Sunshine. Sunshine was not an ordinary clown. Sunshine was a clown cheerleader. Her vision for Sunshine is that she would entertain with her squad of one at charitable or special education athletic events. Think basketball for the developmentally disabled, bowling for the emotionally disturbed. I'm sure that her fantasy would have been some special education, sort of Special Olympics tryouts. She was a special education teacher, so she had access to these events. And yes. So during this time, I didn't invite a lot of friends home. Most of my friends lived in two-parent houses. My mother was dating men that she met in the newspaper personals. Most of them either resembled Andrew Dice Clay or Les Nessman from WKRP. Not a lot in between. And of course, their moms weren't clowns. One of the friends that I trusted with my family was Lynn Sawinski. Lynn very politely told my mother she would love to meet Sunshine one day. So when Lynn decided to fix me up with a friend of her boyfriend's, it happened to coincide with one of my mother's clown cheerleading performances. My mother thought this was a wonderful opportunity to introduce Sunshine not only to Lynn Sawinski, but to the boys. I disagreed, and I forbid her to make an appearance. She wouldn't make any guarantees, so I lied. I told her that Lynn was picking me up at 8, but in fact, Lynn was picking me up at 7. Lynn and I made a plan, this is pre-cell phone, that she would call me when she was leaving her house. And then when she pulled up in front of the house, she would open the passenger door, lean the seat forward, and beep the horn. And I would run outside and dive into the back seat, and we would take off, and no one would be any the wiser. This was the plan. She called me. I put my coat on. I waited inside, looking out the window. When she beeped the horn, I headed for the door. But my mother's door opened, and out came Sunshine. Now, because I was 16 years old and she was overweight and wearing very large clown shoes, I easily beat her in a foot race to the door. But I forgot about the deadbolt. And during the moment it took me to stop and undo the deadbolt, she caught up to me. There was a tussle, there was polyester flying. I threw her to the floor, got outside, slammed the door behind me. Lynn had done as she was told, and the door was open. I dove into the back seat. My date, who I'd never met before, was very surprised by my enthusiasm. I either thought or I said out loud, "Drive!" And they did, for a couple of feet. And then the driver screeched to a halt, and through laughter said, "Who the hell is that?" I didn't have to look, but there she was, standing on the front stoop in her full clown regalia. She had designed the costume herself from the bargain bin at Joann Fabrics and the Goodwill. There was a tutu. There was a large red wig. There was a white face. There were exaggerated eyelashes painted up onto her forehead. She was a big woman. She was also holding pom-poms, and she proceeded to do the cheer I'm about to do for you now. Rah! Rah! Sis My mother had never been a cheerleader, so this was her idea of a cheer. Through laughter, the boys asked again, "Who the hell is that?" And I told them that it was the crazy woman who lived upstairs and that they should probably leave because I had heard she was dangerous. Fast forward to today. I have a 16-year-old daughter who I embarrass without even trying to. Sometimes I have been known to break into dance when I hear music in public, but I remind her it could be worse. I could be wearing a clown costume.
We're going to announce the audience choice.
Okay, so this is the audience choice, so it is who the audience out here chose tonight. And that is Margot.
And second place, I don't even have to say Sunshine the Clown and Julie Baker. Who's going to Maine? Jan Tenenbaum with the story Mom at 59. I'd like a couple of photographs, please, my photographer. And you have been a wonderful audience. If you love storytelling, you won.
I thought I won the You won. Oh my God, I didn't know. I thought it was the audience choice and I came in third. And thank you. And thank you for loving stories, and thank you, Andrea, for doing this. Everybody loves it. Thank you, and go adopted children. Go.
Thank you and good night. Thank you. Remember, a story is not a story until it's told. Go forth and be fruitful. Tell stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you.